It is another Saturday morning in the idyllic San Jose Mountains. Previous videos showed our attempts creating crucible steel with Wootz-like patterns. In this video, we show how to make a Wootz Seax from the steel we created.
The term Seax is an Old Saxon word that means knife. It was in use from the pre-Roman Iron Age till the High Middle Ages. The point of the knife was frequently in the middle of the blade, and the blade and bolster continued smoothly into the hilt. Wootz steel may have reached Europe via the Volga trade route, and the knife created here may have been plausible.
We took the bar from the previous video and forged it into a knife shape. Now we slowly bevel the cutting edge. As mentioned previously, the steel needs to be worked at much lower temperatures than traditional steel.
Wootz steel is ultra-high carbon steel with impurities such as vanadium, around which carbides segregate and form visible patterns.
We aim for a blade width slightly larger than 1.5 inches and continue to forge the blade so that the cutting edge smoothly tapers into the point. In addition to the tapering of the blade width, we also forge in a distal taper in which the back of the blade becomes thinner towards the point. After we are happy with the overall shape, we normalize the blade before cleaning up the profile on the belt sander.
The process of normalizing relieves stresses in the blade that build up while forging the steel under the hammer.
Once the blade has cooled down, the final profile is created on the belt sander. First, the cutting edge is thinned by creating a flat grind. This takes quite some time due to the high carbon content of the steel. Before the heat treat, I remove all grinder marks as these may function as stress risers where the blade might crack.
To harden the knife, the blade is heated up to its critical temperature, in which the carbon is dissolved in the iron matrix forming austenite. Quickly cooling it down transforms the austenite into hard martensite.
I use a file to test if the blade successfully hardened. If the blade is hard, the file will just skid over it. After quenching, I temper the blade at 500 Fahrenheit for an hour. Now comes another time-consuming step in which the blade is further thinned using finer grit belts. This is also the time where the profile is screwed up to make it easier to fit a bolster and handle. Once almost all the grinder marks have been removed, it is time for a quick test edge to see the patterning of the steel. The pattern that we see here is essentially dendritic and not as refined as one would expect from traditional Wootz steel. That is disappointing, but just a step on the way to perfection.
A Seax knife usually comes with a very simple bolster that is just a continuation of the hilt. Here, a simple copper plate is used.
I scribe the size of the tang onto the copper plate and then drill holes and cut out the basic shape. Once the tang fits into the bolster hole, I slowly drift it to the final size. In this particular case, I started with a hole that was too small and the copper got pulled into the hole, which is something I wanted to avoid. The drifting process also ended up bending the copper, and frequent adjustments on the anvil were needed. In the next step, I scribed the overall shape and then painstakingly cut it out with a jeweler's saw. Even at 20 times the normal speed, you can see that it still took quite a while. However, finally it's done, and another exercise in patience has been completed. While the hilt will mostly be made from wood, I also plan to insert a piece of bone decorated with dot and ring motifs. Here I'm using a test piece to get a better feeling for the overall look. In the following steps, I will adjust the shape of the copper bolster and then fit a piece of cow bone to it. As the bone is mostly hollow, I need to find the orientation that works the best. Grinding bone is extremely messy. It generates a lot of very fine dust. I set up a blower to blow most of the dust out of the shop, but I'm also wearing a respirator. For the final fit of the bone to the copper bolster, I glue the pieces together, which makes any subsequent work on them much easier. Choosing the wood for the hilt is not always an easy choice. In this case, opportunity knocked on the door in the form of discarded ironwood flooring. Ironwood is very dense and heavy and will give the Seax a very substantial weight. Since I am already pursuing a hybrid weapon, I am not too concerned that ironwood might not have been available in continental Europe in early medieval times. However, I did have a lot of difficulty working the ironwood with the chisels I had at my disposal. In the end, I needed to use a file to clean up the channel I carved for the tang. The glued construction of the wooden hilt is another artifact of the ironwood panels I was working with. If the piece of wood had been larger, I probably would have burned the tang into it. However, since I have shown how to burn in the tang in previous videos, I get to show another technique here. When gluing the panels together, I intentionally leave some space without glue around the carved channel. I also coat the tang with oil so that it does not become trapped by potential excess glue. The knife is slowly starting to take shape. Now everything needs to be fine-tuned. I establish the rough shape of the handle using a bandsaw. For a Seax, it's important that the blade shape continues smoothly into the hilt. The final shape of the hilt is established using a belt grinder. Since I am aiming for compound curves, the rubber contact wheel on the belt grinder will come in handy. For any kind of grinding that involves fine dust, I recommend wearing breathing protection, or at the very least have a door open to the outside to which the dust can escape. Creating the hilt shape is a very incremental process for me, where I constantly check how the shape is developing. For the final adjustments, I sand the hilt by hand using sandpaper up to 220 grit. As you can see, the Seax is slowly coming together. A lot of work still needs to be done though. In the following, I use Japanese polishing stones to polish and sharpen the blade. The first step is to true up the stones. My current setup is far from ideal, but this is only a temporary situation and should be getting better soon. In the meantime, don't get seasick. Using the stones, I can remove all scratches that were made by the belt sander. Finally, after many hours, all scratches have been removed and I can edge the blade. The polishing stones themselves already reveal some of the steel structure. The edge will bring out different parts a little bit stronger. To achieve the uniform edge, it is important to remove all oils from the blade. I do this by thoroughly cleaning it. For pattern welded blades, I might edge up to 10 or 20 minutes. For the Crucible steel, I dip the blade in only for about 30 seconds. To achieve a very subtle look, I remove most of the black oxides using 1000 grit sandpaper. Afterwards, I mix red iron oxide with oil and rub down the blade. This creates a somewhat matte finish. Before I can put everything together, the bone and wood needs to be mated together perfectly. First, I fix the bolster with a drop of glue to the blade. Then I use copy paper to find the high spots on the bone in relation to the wood and remove them with files. I also polish up the copper and slightly bevel the edge, which creates a nicer look. One of the motivations behind creating this knife was to experiment with decorating bone using the dot and ring motif. This is a very old motif that was still in use during Viking times. I use a cut-off disc to frame the design with 2 solid lines. For the dot and ring motif, I created several drill bits that I used to cut differently sized rings into the bone. For the actual patterns, I use simple geometric arrangements. Since the bone is curved, the drill bit needs to be carefully placed so that it does not wander on its own. This is not as easy as it seems. To create a strong contrast, I mixed beeswax with charcoal to create a greasy black substance that I can force into the holes in the bone. The excess is carefully removed with a knife that is scraped over the bone. Since I don't own a buffer, I use felt cloth to polish the bone and make it shiny. To my eye, the result looks very nice. The last step is to glue everything together. For that, I use a slow setting epoxy. In my original plans, I had meant to use cutlass resin, but I was running out of time. I use small pieces of wood to fill up the cavity in the bone. After waiting for a day, the epoxy has completely cured. Now, I just need to seal the bone and the wood. I use a mixture of tong and linseed oil, which is distributed as gunstock finish. I put on about 5 coats and use fine steel wool in between. I test the sharpness with a piece of paper and detect that the knife still needs more sharpening towards the tip. After a lot of work, the knife is finally finished. If you liked this video, please subscribe to my channel and spread the word.